Hey everyone, Brittany Harlow, VNN here for another episode of VNN Live Wednesday nights. Thank you for joining us, Verified News Community. We keep it to about 30 minutes here. Sorry I'm a little late. We typically start at 8 p.m. Central. I'm here in Oklahoma. I've just been getting some last minute graphics together. It's been a really long and busy day. Uh, Very long, last several months. April Wilkens coverage. And if you're April Wilkins, it's been a very long 30 last years. So that's the story that we're talking about tonight. First things first, if you wouldn't mind being a part of the conversation, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Drop us a line or two in the comments, send us an email, bharlow@verifiednews.network. And of course, the biggest way that you could support our coverage, lifting up community voices, giving a voice to the voiceless, support our coverage, what we're doing, what we're working towards here is to subscribe to our email, newsletters, and updates, and you do that at verifiednews.network. I have a good amount of reading tonight to do, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. So one of the things I wanted to touch on before we move to April's plea, which is the main topic of the conversation, and some of the other voices here at play with this April Wilkins case, I always like to throw out our app that we have. It is a social media platform that's designed exclusively for Verified News. You can find it at app.verifiednews.network. And we had a lot of stories come through so far this week. For us, we focus on reporting on stories that are not told very prevalently in the mainstream media. In the case of April Wilkins, stories that aren't told at all. So you can see it there at the bottom. I'm going to try to interact with it real quick. This hashtag April Story. It's the latest in the April Story series that we've rolled out this year. We started our coverage of the April Wilkins case last summer, I believe, is kind of when we kicked off and started researching it. If you're unfamiliar with the April Wilkins case, which a lot of people are, April Wilkins is a woman who's been serving life in prison here in Oklahoma for the last 24 years for a murder charge that she was convicted of after killing her rapist and abuser, a man who essentially tortured her and stalked her, harassed her, vandalized her home, a whole lot of other things, especially the last 2 months of his life up until she killed him. But there's just a lot of things wrong with this case, and one of the biggest issues still that remains to this day is that this case doesn't get a lot of coverage here in Tulsa, where they were from, because this woman got involved in an abusive relationship with the son of a local millionaire, and that's who she ended up killing. And ever since, for the last almost 24 years, they've had a real knife in the coverage of this case regarding April's side of the story. Even to this day, even recently, the story continues to be buried because the owners of Don Carlton Honda have a say-so in it. They are the biggest, or one of the biggest sponsors of local media in the Tulsa area. And this man that abused and raped April to the point that she ended up killing him to save her own life was the son of Don Carlton. And so that, to me, was really shocking. Like, wow, this is a crazy story when I first found it out. Like, he's a local the family of a local millionaire. Like, why isn't this being talked about? And it's because of how much media control they have here because of their advertising. And I heard that, I was like, no, that can't be true. Like, that's things that you hear about in the movies, right? That's things that you hear, that you read about in the stories. Like, that stuff it's not so obvious and so prevalent in real life, but it really is, and it is so frustrating. So I'm pretty drained right now, but I still think it's important to continue to give a voice to people who don't have a voice and people who are silenced by people with a lot of money, people with a lot of power, and that kind of corruption that keeps people down. So tonight's live stream was titled April's Plea from Prison. And I chose that because here in a stack of documents that I have, first on the list is April Wilkens' letter that she wrote to the Pardon and Parole Board this year, that defending why she should be paroled. She was sentenced to life with parole for that murder conviction. And she's been up for parole several times. She got a parole hearing the last 2 times that she applied, and then this year they wouldn't even give her a parole hearing. So it's kind of like, how do you get parole if you have a sentence like life with parole? So I wanted to give this opportunity to share her voice from prison with a copy of this letter, so that she, at least, even if it's just on VNN, even if it's just on this live stream, that she has some kind of voice in the world and that she's not completely silenced where she is in prison. Okay. So, no, it's not. My name is April Wilkens, and I am a 51-year-old grandmother in my 24th year of incarceration. I have had no misconducts in prison for over 21 years. I was sent to prison in January 2000 after spending 21 months in the Tulsa jail. I turned my life around behind bars by getting close to God and other people who love God. I have faithfully participated in Redeeming Love Prison Ministry, RLPM, for almost 24 years. RLPM ministers at the Tulsa jail and several Oklahoma prisons. It was my honor to volunteer and help build the chapel here at Mabel Bassett Correctional Center, where our services are held. To be sure, I did not come to prison and find God. God was not lost, I was. I was so lost when I met Terry Carlton that I wasn't even sure if God was real. Now I know without a doubt that God is closer than the air I breathe, and Jesus' love has redeemed me. By the grace of God, I have overcome the mental and physical trauma I've suffered, and I haven't abused drugs since 1998. Character is created in the crucible of pain. The Lord has used everything that's happened to mold me into a wiser, stronger, more compassionate person who now helps others overcome through Christ. Here are a few of my accomplishments behind bars. In 2021, I became the first and so far only woman to make over $1 million for True Energy, an energy brokerage firm. It only took me about 4 years to accomplish that feat. So, I just wanted to say, and read that back again, 2021, last year, she became the only woman to make over $1 million for an energy brokerage firm. In prison, not being able to be paroled for this offense of killing her abuser, making over $1 million for a company that she works for in prison. In 2017, I was one of 10 women at MBCC chosen by True Energy to open its first female site and one of the first 2 selected to actually become energy brokers. She also I also designed and coordinated the firm's Closer Academy. Remember, this is April Wilkens' words here. A training program consisting of months of classes and a one-year internship, which teaches women and men how to be successful energy brokers, a job skill they can use to make a living. I was one of the first 6 participants to complete the Guardian Angel Dog Training Program in 2014 and went on to teach other participants how to train rescue dogs. Were featured in the Basset Tales documentary about the inception of the dog program at MBCC. In 2020, I helped create and organize the Rose Network that keeps family and friends of MBCC prisoners connected and informed about issues at MBCC. I am a live-in caregiver for a mentally ill prisoner who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Prison staff have utilized me as a live-in mentor for at-risk prisoners, including youths in the past as well. I have completed 16 rehabilitative programs and classes, including domestic violence, substance abuse education, impact of crime on victims, parenting mentoring, assertiveness training, anger management, and thinking for a change, to name a few. I was the valedictorian of the Horticulture Career Tech in 2002 and tutored other students in the program. I worked in the gardens for over a decade. I serve as a fitness trainer, helping others get in shape. I've led several fitness classes in prison and currently lead the weightlifting class. I'm also coordinating the running club startup. I began running in prison about 20 years ago and ran my first marathon at MBCC in 2017. I was on the first MBCC rodeo team and competed in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary Rodeo in 2006. Briefly, here are the facts of my case. I did not know when I became engaged to Terry Carlton in 1995 that his ex-wife and ex-girlfriend had both previously filed protective orders against him. We met earlier that year at a business he owned. I was 25 and he was 37. He treated me like a princess at first. The abuse started in early 1996, and he mentally, verbally, physically, and sexually abused me over the next 2 years. I had 3 protective orders against him. The violence escalated whenever I tried to end the relationship. Now, federal judge Claire Egan represented me in my November 1996 protective order application against Terry. She saved an audio tape I gave her of him admitting he choked, beat, and raped me and that he was the sole perpetrator of violence. Neither Judge Egan's testimony nor the tape was presented at trial because, as she stated in a supporting affidavit, my trial attorney didn't contact her. I eventually learned Terry was using drugs, and regrettably, I started using drugs with him in 1997, about a year after the violence began. I had come to feel like I had no control left over my own body and mind. I was broken and blamed myself. I was so ashamed and humiliated, I had no self-esteem or self-worth left. By early 1998, after I left Terry for good, he was stalking me. He repeatedly broke into my home and ransacked it. He cut my phone lines, he threatened my son's life, called police numerous times. He was arrested outside my home in February 1998 at approximately 3 a.m. with a loaded 9mm pistol and a stun gun. An emergency protective order was issued to me then that wasn't enforced. In March 1998, a warrant was issued for his arrest after he had failed to appear in court on a gun charge stemming from his arrest outside my home. Twice in early April 1998, police didn't enforce the warrant for his arrest and instead took me to a mental hospital where staff treated me like I was imagining someone was trying to harm me, and I fled once. He said he had police take me to a mental hospital because he thought a stay there would teach me that he was the only person who cared about me. On April 26, 1998, he showed up at the mental hospital with balloons and a new car he said was my birthday present. When I still refused to get back together with him, he became hostile and threatened me, prompting an employee to intervene before he left, enraged. The next day, I was released into a drug treatment program, but left in fear of what he might do to my son if he couldn't get to me, or what he might do to my home. I returned to my home to find he'd already broken in and ransacked it. I didn't call police because I was scared they wouldn't arrest him and it would only make him angrier. I tried unsuccessfully to get help from friends. I was traumatized and overwhelmed. He told me previously if I would just talk to him, he wouldn't come to my home. So in the early morning hours of April 28, 1998, rather than wait in terror for him to show up at my home again, I went to his house hoping to make peace with him. He was glad to see me when I arrived, but became angry when I continued to refuse to get back together with him. So, I'm going to hit the pause button there. And I want to say, if I haven't already made this clear, this is pretty graphic stuff, what happened to her. So please keep in mind, I'm going to continue reading, but it is going to be some graphic topics and words about abuse and sexual abuse that I just want to fully prepare you for. He forced me into his bedroom at gunpoint, then brutally beat and raped me and tried to break my neck. I was later able to get his small .22 caliber pistol and hide it in a pocket. When he saw his gun was missing, he became enraged and handcuffed my hands together in front. He said he was going to rape me. I can't say that on this live stream, but essentially sodomize her with swearing and kill me. Frantic, I managed to reach the gun. He lunged at me and was about to grab the gun when I shot him. I heard his voice, and it startled me, and I instinctively continued to fire until the gun was empty in a matter of seconds. It was not a conscious choice to keep firing. I was in shock. I removed the handcuffs with hand sanitizer. The phone rang. I answered it and told the caller what happened. She called police, and I let them in. Prosecutors offered me a manslaughter plea with a 20-year sentence. In addition to Judge Egan's testimony and the tape of Terry admitting that he choked, beat, and raped me, not being presented at trial, the outstanding warrant for Terry's arrest, and my negative urinalysis from the day of the shooting were also not presented. The jury was not given the option of convicting me of any offense less than first-degree murder. I was a young single mom when I met Terry Carlton over half my lifetime ago. Naturally, I regret so many things I did back then out of inexperience, weakness, trauma, and desperation. I made mistakes that hurt other people, and I'm truly sorry for that. I had never been in a violent, intimate relationship before. What's more, I had no domestic violence education or training, something I now believe everyone should have starting in elementary school. As the old adage goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Never heard. I had never even heard of battered women syndrome and was utterly ignorant about the devastating psychological effects of intimate partner violence and abuse. Unfortunately, I learned the hard way, with a fist in my face and my face to the floor. I know things would have been different if I had been following God. What would the wiser old lady I am today say to the foolish young woman I was back then? God is real. Love and seek God first, and don't date any man who doesn't do the same. Surround yourself with people who love the Lord. It's okay to be single. If a man seems too good to be true, he probably is. Don't rush in. Take plenty of time to get to know him. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Don't put up with abuse even once. It won't stop. It won't get better. It only gets worse. You don't deserve to be abused. Think better of yourself. Love yourself. Love others as yourself. Don't use drugs. Drugs only make things worse. Money can't buy love, peace, happiness, safety, or security. God is your source for everything. Don't put your trust in man or money. Trust God. My parents have both died since I've been in prison. My mom in 2020 and my dad in 2017. My son is now 31, and having his mom in prison has been extremely hard on him. He once said in a letter to the parole board that our separation hurt and it never went away. It still hurts, and he wants me home. I have a 3-year-old granddaughter now, too, and want to be there for her and my son both. My niece and sister also miss me and want me home. I miss my family so much and pray God puts it in your heart to let me go home to them now. My family, along with Project Commutation, RLPM, and his house outreach ministry, are all eager to help me successfully transition back into society. I plan to work at Shebrew's Coffee House and live at an HHOM transitional home initially when released. Who better to learn the ropes from than Rhonda Bear? Before incarceration, I was a board-certified prosthetist. It's still a dream of mine to work as a medical missionary in underprivileged places where my skills are desperately needed. To that end, I also plan to take prosthetics refresher classes and ultimately return to work in the prosthetics field. I will continue to advocate for incarcerated women and abuse victims. I also want to educate our youth about domestic violence and help them from making the same mistakes I did. Please give me a second chance at life. Respectfully, April Wilkens, ODOC number 282399. So, that is April Wilkens' letter to the Pardon and Parole Board asking them to grant her parole this year. To be honest, I don't know if they ever read it. I assume it was part of her packet that they were supposed to read. But if you hadn't seen our coverage earlier this year, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted to deny her a parole hearing on March 7th. And so she's stage 2 parole process, I guess, meaning that in order to get parole, she has to apply for a parole hearing, and then they, after that, they grant her or deny her the parole hearing. Then they actually have the parole hearing, and they, vote whether to deny or approve her parole. Then it goes to the governor to get signed. But yeah, so she lost that chance, and she's only up for parole once every 3 years. So she will not be able to be up for parole again until 2025. So there is, and I'm going to drop it in the comments after if you're interested, a petition to have the Pardon and Parole Board and Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt commute her sentence based on a really big part. Like, I'm not a lawyer, but what we know about battered women syndrome and what now compared to what we knew 25 years ago and the effects of abuse, like, can you imagine? That's a lifetime. 25 years of research, of looking at how abuse and trauma affects the minds of women. That's a long time. I got one more thing to read to you guys. And it is the letter that the Tulsa County District Attorney's Office submitted encouraging the Pardon and Parole Board to deny April Wilkens from getting a parole hearing and parole this year. So here we are. Now let me remind you, the District Attorney's Office, prosecutor at the time, DA Tim Harris, who later befriended Don Carlton and received campaign contributions from him, is the one who put April behind bars essentially 24 years ago by telling the jury that she cried rape, that she wasn't any kind of real victim, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I was shocked to kind of get this letter that was submitted to the Pardon and Parole Board on February 22nd of this year. And I'll talk about it in a second why I'm so shocked after I read it. Members of the board, the state of Oklahoma, Stephen Kunzweiler, District Attorney, respectfully objects to the recommendation that Miss April Wilkens be granted parole on her conviction in Tulsa County case number CF 1998-2173 for murder first degree. Given the nature of the offense and the facts of the offense as set forth in the parole investigation, the state of Oklahoma believes that the sentence imposed by the jury is appropriate, reflects the seriousness of the offense, provides for just punishment, and affords adequate deterrence to both defendant and the public. Thus, she presents a risk to the safety of the public. Additionally, the state would note that this crime occurred before the passage of 21 OS 13.1, which establishes that persons who commit the crimes enumerated in the statute must serve 85% of the sentence before becoming eligible for parole. As such, Ms. Wilkens were to have committed the crime today, she would not be eligible for parole for another 17 years. Accordingly, the state of Oklahoma respectfully requests that the Pardon and Parole Board not recommend that Ms. Wilkins be granted parole. Respectfully, the Assistant District Attorney. Now, how contradictory is it that the Tulsa County District Attorney's office says they believe the sentence imposed by the jury is appropriate, and that 24 years ago, they think that the sentence was appropriate 24 years ago. But if it was committed today, she would have to serve 85% of it. If she was convicted today, she would have to serve 85%. And so they think that she should be held to that standard, even though this offense occurred before that was the law. To me, I was like, wow, I mean, even if that wasn't the case, it still is pretty excessive, 85%. But the fact of the matter is, when that jury convicted her and found her guilty of murder and offered that sentence as, and again, wasn't presented with a manslaughter option, just murder, which in itself is against the law. In other cases have been appealed for that purpose. You don't just say murder or not murder. There's a lot of other options, and she was granted there's 3 punishments for murder, first-degree murder: the death penalty, life without parole, and life with parole. So the jury gave her the least harsh of those 3 options, but all of those options were incredibly harsh. And at the time, people were not forced to serve 85% of their sentence. At that time, parole could be obtained after 15 years with good behavior for a life sentence. 15 years. And so that is the assumption that jury could have been when they were like, life with parole. You do good, you can be out in 15 years. They weren't making that decision with this 85% rule in mind because it didn't exist yet. And so also it's very picky and choosy to me to think that the Tulsa County District Attorney would be like, yeah, we agree with the jury's decision that they made 24 years ago, but we also want to hold it to today's standard of that 85% rule. It's like, do you agree with the laws of the past or not? Do you agree that things change over time or not? Because battered women syndrome, the research and the available knowledge and the commonality of that was very scant at that time. That was not like a common defense. In fact, it was really very new, the whole concept that battered women could essentially go insane under the duress and stress of trauma and violence that continues and builds up and builds up. And this woman had been out of a mental hospital from all of this, stemming from this horrible domestic violence relationship. She hadn't even been out 48 hours when this happened. So it is really crazy. I wanted to share this with you. April's plea from prison that you're not going to hear anywhere else. And if the state of Oklahoma has anything to do with it, you're never going to hear it at all. These stories and these voices from these women who have to either die or go to prison for defending themselves out of horribly violent and abusive relationships. I'm very surprised and disappointed in the Tulsa County District Attorney's Office for their stance on this case and this, not just this woman, but women in general, that would say, even if you've been severely traumatized, beaten, abused, and no one will help you, that's still not a good reason to defend yourself. And that's still not a good reason to save your own life. Even now, 24 years later, nothing has changed here in Oklahoma. The world outside of Oklahoma, the United States outside of Oklahoma, are adopting battered women syndrome as to their laws and to the understanding of that research that is, exists, and that true terrible psychological damage results from that kind of continued abuse and stalking and no one helping you. But not Oklahoma. They're just standing still and letting women continue to be brutalized. And I don't understand it. So that's why we continue our coverage. That's why we want to lift up voices like April's that are living true nightmares. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. We have done now 3 stories on this case. We have 2 more in the works. And like I said, I'll post the link to the petition and in the comments. And any questions, comments, concerns you have, please let me know about our coverage of this case. If you have anything that you want to share, I'm going to throw up this contact info in a minute, or less than a minute, maybe 10 seconds or so. But thank you, Verified News community, for tuning in and listening to this story and really being a part of this change that's so needed in the state of Oklahoma to protect and save our women and help them out of this situation. But go to app.verifiednews.network. You can find coverage of the story. Just type in April Wilkens. And that's it for me. You guys have a great night.